Hi, everyone. Welcome to our event this evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. My name is Duncan Pickard, and I'm a jumbo class of 2010. I graduated with majors in history and American studies. I'm currently an attorney working at Debevoise and Plimpton, which is a law firm in New York. I focus on international law. I'm actually tuning in from London, where I've been for the past year during the pandemic, but normally based in New York. This evening's event is being run in conjunction with our annual March to the Top fundraising campaign, which is a month-long campaign that encourages our alumni to support funding priorities on campus through a series of special monetary challenges. And I'm involved in this effort through the Young Friends of Tufts alumni. These funding priorities this year include COVID-19 response, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the Unexpected Hardship Fund, and financial aid. Tonight is an opportunity to learn more about one of those priority areas, which is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fund. I'm very excited to have Nandi Bino, Jared Smith, and Hope Freeman here with us tonight to talk about this fund and the critical support it is providing to current students at Tufts. First, Nandi is the Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at Tufts, as well as a double jumbo, having received both her BA and Master's from Tufts. Dean Bino has been supporting student access at Tufts for more than 10 years and began her current role as an Associate Dean in 2019. And we were also classmates. Jared is director of the First Resource Center, as well as the program director for the BLAST program. He's also a jumbo, and since graduating from Tufts, Jared has helped guide and support students through their transition into college. Our third speaker is Hope, and Hope is both the director of the LGBT Center at Tufts and the interim director of the Women's Center. Hope brings her amazing background in advocacy and empowerment, counseling, and public health to everything she does at Tufts. All of our speakers tonight have contributed so much to Tufts' successes over the years, and their leadership has been critical during the uncertainty caused by the pandemic. So Dean Bino, Jared, Hope, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Just before I have some questions prepared, and before we jump into those, I just want to encourage everyone in the audience to please post any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We have some folks from Tufts who are going to be monitoring that and feeding those questions in. So we hope to get to those later in the evening, and we'll get to those, as many of those as we can. But just first though, we can just start out and ask what is the Diversity and Inclusion Fund? When was it started and why? And what needs is the fund currently addressing?
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to start there. Welcome everyone. Really excited to virtually see you all today from my room. So I thought I would maybe just give a little bit of background on our division, which is fairly new. So we're the Division of Student Diversity and Inclusion, and we officially became the division in 2019, along with my appointment to my new role. And that was a really intentional shift to do a couple of things. So folks here know all of the centers as the Group of Six, right? And have always done really amazing advocacy work. But coming together under our divisional umbrella was really intentional in thinking about how we support students across all the centers. How do we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice holistically, and supporting all of our students of historically marginalized backgrounds and identities? Though we don't include the International Center, as folks may know, they're a really important partner in the work that we do in thinking about and supporting international students who intersect with all of our centers in a myriad of different ways. So that's just a little bit of background, and I think it's been really helpful, particularly when we've come upon the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the movements for racial justice that have come up, that we really have a division that is dedicated to supporting each other and supporting our students. So, so the fund is also, because of that, relatively new, and it really is here to support these collective efforts for the division in thinking about the ways that we can do that sort of cross-cutting, programming support and other pieces, understanding that, students move through all of our spaces as their whole selves, right? And bringing your whole selves to each center space, thinking about what they do. There may not be one particular space that feels like fits for them, and that's sort of the sort of place that the division is sort of sitting in. Another piece that I want to, before I let you move on, is just to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing within the university's anti-racist work streams. So as folks may know, President Monaco set a charge for Tufts to become anti-racist this past summer. And our division has been really critical in helping advance and articulate the voices of students that we support. The folks here, Hope, Jared, and the other directors and other staff who are here are really on the front lines of talking to students and understanding what the barriers are institutionally to having that best and most fulfilling Tufts experience. And so we were able to participate in 4 of the 5 work streams in a really meaningful way up until this point. So just wanted to sort of share that as beginning, sort of a beginning context. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I think Hope and Jared, please feel free to jump in. I think also just maybe hearing a little bit more about the Tufts as an anti-racist institution initiative, and just maybe hearing a little bit more about kind of where that stands, and where, what the next steps of that is, what the successes have been so far, and particularly how the fund might be able to support that work going forward.
Sure. I can start, and then Hope and Jared, feel free to jump in. I think all of the reports for the work streams have been made public. And so I think we're right now in the implementation phase, right? So really thinking about how do we put these myriad of action items that have come out put it into practice, in essence. And so as we think about how that connects to the student experience, what some of those barriers that have been identified and articulated in the work stream, this fund will sort of be helpful to think about executing that in the upcoming years. And I'm wondering, just as I think here, Hope, I don't know if you wanted to mention some of the support initiatives that sort of we've broadly been doing through the pandemic and moving forward.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks, Nandi. So hi, folks. Again, my name is Hope. I use she, her, and hers for my pronouns. So, I'm sure as folks can imagine, and please forgive the echo, as folks can imagine, March 2020 was really wild for a lot of us. We were kind of in places that we didn't expect to be, and we were in crisis mode for the majority of that time. So when we learned that Tufts was going to be closing and sending folks home, taking the lead of the first resource center, it was very much buying plane tickets for students, laptops for students, Wi-Fi routers, thinking about what were their required course materials if they were going to be continuing classes. I had some students who were taking a lot of art classes, and it was like, I have to print these certain prints, like how, I'm not exactly sure. So supporting students around that. We were supporting students on finding storage. helping students whose borders had closed as a part of their countries, and then making sure that they were being supported while they were on campus, right? So we went into, like I said, crisis mode, and we utilized a lot of the budgets, our remaining budgets, to make sure that students were getting the support that they needed, which is another reason why this fund was created, right? We saw a big need in a really short amount of time, and we had to hustle and work together as a team to make sure that we executed that for the students that we were supporting. So a lot of the other initiatives, we were making sure that we were checking in on students, right? Like, how are you now that you're home? How are you navigating home? What does study look like for you, right? Like, is it different from when you were on campus? Do you need additional support? What's happening kind of in your city, in your state? Because as we know, it's a little different depending on the state and what region of the country that the students are in. Another thing that I found, being the director of the LGBT Center and working very closely with counseling and mental health services as well as health services, was that we were finding a lot of students that were still trying to figure out their gender identities, still trying to figure out their sexual orientations, and sometimes not being in a space where they're able to do that in a way that maybe they would while they were at Tufts, right? There's a little bit of a home away from home feel when we go away to college, and that was a little bit lost when a lot of the students had gone home, right? So making sure that the students were still getting the support and the supplies that they needed. So I'm thinking about like access to Planned Parenthood, again, depending on the state, right? Thinking about insurance, and especially when there's certain cities and states where trans and non-binary folks are not included or thought about on insurance. Like, how are we best supporting our students in the cities that they're in to make sure that they're getting their needs met? And then also, we were very much like on call, right? So I'm thinking of a personal story of a student that I was working with who was supporting a friend who was not a Tufts student in Mississippi on where to find post-exposure prophylaxis, right? So PEP and PrEP. So basically it's an HIV kind of medication that supports folks from getting HIV or suppresses it from folks being able to contract it, right? And so that was an emergency type of service that wouldn't necessarily fall within kind of the spectrum of being like Tufts or like LGBT stuff, but we had to move into action because these are our students. Students need to support, and we had to make sure that we were finding the support they needed and gaining access. So we were also thinking about a lot of the students around just access in general, thinking of those students who may be on campus at Tufts, but maybe it's hard to kind of cut through the red tape, hard to gain access to resource. So to my point earlier, very much trying to make sure that we were servicing students in a way that they were still getting the same type of support that they would on campus, but in a virtual way. So we had to make sure that we were readily available and making sure that we were on call for most of the time for students. As far as programming was going, we had to adjust. Again, we had to shift very seriously around what our programming looked like for students because we had to go completely virtual. And that was something that a lot of us had not had a lot of experience with, but we came up with a lot of amazing ways for students to engage. We came up with the Africana Center had a speaking facts series. So basically talking about like discrimination in the classroom, how to respond, what that looks like, the history of Black folks at Tufts University, and so on, right? So we did a lot of work when it had to do with orientation as well, and completely shifting a lot of our curriculum to make sure that we are doing our best to engage with first year and incoming students, where normally we would engage with them in a more hands-on way. It was a little bit different, but I feel like we did a really good job and adjusted the best way that we could. I'm not sure if you had anything you wanted to add, Jared or Nandi.
Yeah, the only thing, thank you both also for, really hitting it pretty cleanly on the head. I think the only thing that I would add is just to quickly just contextualize for us. One thing that I think is really important to mention is that the Group of Six does work with all campus partners. And I say that because, if you think about what centers are included within our division, where the division is fairly new, but the populations that we serve and the centers themselves have existed for a very long time at Tufts. So, as you think about who we are and a lot of the work that we're doing, and Hope really, shared a lot of the immediate work that happened over the last year during COVID. Just to quickly just say what the centers are within the division in case you need a refresher. So I'm Jared Smith. I'm the director of the First Resource Center. Hope is the director of the LGBT Center and interim director of the Women's Center. And then we have the Latinx Center, which recently had a name change. So you may know it as the Latino Center, as well as our Asian American Center. And I know I'm missing one. I always do this. What am I missing? Yes, in the Africana Center. So that's the 6. So of course you could always look us up as the DSDI, the Division for Student Diversity and Inclusion, or you could think about the centers individually, but we all work alongside each other within this one unit.
Thank you so much. I Hope, for explaining all that, for all the amazing support that you've been giving Tufts students over the past year, all 3 of you, and Jared for that explanation. Just to be clear and following up on what you just said, Jared. So the group of 6 is kind of just placing it kind of within the university. It falls within your remit, Nandi. Is that right? And then then this is and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fund is one of the funding mechanisms by which the group of 6 can support students at Tufts. But there is also, of course, institutional funding that supports your office, Nandi, and also the centers individually. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And
great.
so we're trying to sort of shift from that group of 6 language to the Division of Student Diversity and Inclusion, because I think, as I sort of mentioned, it does also in recognition that, the 6 centers don't cover the entirety of our student population. And so we have to, think expansively about our students who might be holding different identities. So that's kind of the broad strokes, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, that's great. I'm just going to go quickly to the Q&A because we got some Q&A questions coming in. Since we're focusing on these institutional aspects, one question is, can you discuss what diversity is represented on the diversity committee? And I think maybe that is something that you just covered, but and maybe just and maybe to group that. There's another question. As one of the groups which has been victimized for centuries, and because of the resurgence of anti-Semitism around the world, what are your thoughts about including Jewish students and creating the group of 7?
That's really important questions. I think I'll sort of take them one at a time, if you will. So on the sort of across the board, when we think about doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and specifically, maybe I'll talk about the anti-racist work streams. It was really important for the leadership of those work streams to have a really diverse cross-section of individuals who across the university, right, to participate. So there were faculty members, graduate students, undergraduate students, as well as staff from student affairs, from our division, as well as senior leadership, of course, thinking and sort of broadly about not just the Medford and Somerville campus, but of course the SMFA, Grafton, and the health sciences campuses. So there really was a breadth of of folks represented, and I think they sort of did a pretty good job of balancing that, so that there was a sort of just sheer representation across the board for that. So I don't know, Hope, Jared, would you have anything to add on that piece?
Honestly, I feel like as far as the anti-racism work streams, I think that Tufts as a university did its due diligence around making sure that university wide, right down to the vet school, the medical side, the sciences school, things like that, were covered in making sure that folks were well represented, and not just like faculty or any, or like, you know, I'm using heavy air quotes, right? But like important like administrators, but like everybody was considered and asked and thought about across a lot of these work streams. And I would say that we were pretty well represented in a lot of them, especially thinking about the students as well.
Yeah, I also will just add that there were many opportunities for feedback along the way. So even folks who didn't sit within the committee structure themselves had an opportunity to go to town hall, forums. They had online opportunities to sort of read and submit materials that were then really intentionally incorporated into the final recommendations. So there was really that broad representation as well. Yeah. And so to the second really important question, this is part of part of the work that we do, and we really have sort of are seeking to think about it from an overall arching anti-oppression framework. So understanding that many Jewish students find homes within our centers, right, as their parts of their intersectioning identity. They may also find a home in our Hillel Center, right? And they are a place where we are in conversation and partnership to think about how best to support students. And we're really committed to working with all students across these intersecting identities so that they really get all the supports and resources, and we can, the hope is that we work ourselves out of a job because we don't have to worry about discrimination, harassment, anti-Semitism, all of this, right? But we know that that work is ongoing. But that's really part of what we strive to do, is to have every student have that, that moment of belonging, that Tufts is my home and my place, and I feel like I belong. So yeah, really important question.
Yeah, I wanted to, since we're also talking about institutional issues with these anti-racism work streams, I understand. I know that the initiative was announced by President Monaco, and it's fantastic that they've created your position, Nandi, at the level of a dean. I mean, I think that says a lot about the kind of institutional commitment to this kind of work, and moving it forward. I was wondering if you could just say more about kind of how these initiatives are kind of prioritized at senior levels within the university, and in particular, how this move from the Group of Six framework toward a more cohesive one is kind of reflected in institutional priorities. I think that the Group of Six kind of frame was definitely very central to my experience at Tufts, knowing about what the centers are, and I think it's my own personal view of this is just kind of thinking about it in a more cohesive way and recognizing intersectionality and kind of putting students at the center is really, it just seems to reflect that really well. And I just wanted to kind of pause on that for a few minutes.
Sure, I can start, and then colleagues, I feel like I'm talking a lot. But I would say that the intentional shift for Tufts to become an anti-racist institution, and all of the work that many folks, in our division and across the institution have done, students, faculty. I mean, there are people who have been doing this work for many years. There are faculty members, staff members who have been working at Tufts for 20, 25 years and have continued to champion these issues. That's part of their ethos. And I think what's great now in this moment is that this is an opportunity for us as an institution to really have a cohesive set of a cohesive frame around how we're going to operate moving forward. And so there, I will say that there's great institutional commitment to not just to what has been set out in this current framing, but particularly for us in the division, we recognize that the work continues. Every strategic plan that you make is inherently incomplete, and you've got to go back and you've got to add and bring new voices into the mix and think about it. So it is definitely ongoing, and iterative is my new word that I keep using to sort of recognize that this work will always continue. But there is, as an alum, I think it's remarkable to sort of see that piece. And now I would stop talking.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I think is really important to think about, like as we move forward as a university, I do think that there are like pieces of a puzzle here. So, as alum, you probably received an email about what those strategic plans are. You have updates about what that looks like, but you're also, in conversation with 3 folks who are also helping implement a lot of these changes and really push to make sure that our students are continually centered in this conversation. The reason I really try to bring that up is because there's one thing to call these committees and have these conversations, which are extremely important and valuable and necessary to moving this university forward. And then we also have like the three of us and our other colleagues who are also thinking about, okay, so what does that mean for a day-to-day? How do we make sure that our students continue to remain safe, to find joy at Tufts, and to really see themselves in this university, regardless of the necessary work that is happening around us every day? So if you joined us a little earlier, you would have heard a lot of the things that we've been doing from Hope to really think about prioritizing our students' well-being and safety, but also help them foster community, and also like in ways like empower them to claim their voices and really be heard and represented in these strategic plans and these initiatives, because our students are the heartbeat of this university. And as alum, I'm also an alum. I feel very strongly that it takes us to really think about pushing the narrative that sometimes you may not yet see. But we really work hard to encourage our students, regardless of our membership on these committees, to dream bigger than what they might see right in front of them. And I say that because I think that, if it's coming from our senior administrators and also from our student body, automatically changes happen a lot quicker, and people get to see what our students are dreaming of. Because even though I graduated in 2016, sometimes I think I'm a little too old as I think about how do I best support my 18 and 19-year-olds, and how do I be proactive about the types of support that they deserve. And I really say that to say that it's a all hands on deck type of environment for us, and really our division has been working really hard to find ways to make sure we elevate our students' voices and really help them create spaces for themselves and make space for others, so that we can look back a year from now and say we've made insane amounts of progress, even in some cases beyond what we may have dreamed of a year before that.
Ooh, say that, Jared.
That was great. Yeah, that was fantastic. Hope everyone's writing that down. That should go right in the next strategic plan. I'm going to go back to the Q&A. I have a question from Andrew Toll, who says, given we all have our biases and prejudices, students will arrive on campus as freshmen with these well installed, with the sad face emoji. How is the university thinking about screening applicants for bias? And I think I'm going to, that's an important question. And I want to just also take it one step further, which is to say, how do we, I mean, it's in a way impossible to screen for for bias, that we all come in with our frames. So how, you know, how does this work take that into account when 1,200 students arrive on campus, you know, with their own backgrounds? And if I can pile on the question a little bit more, how is this work kind of bridging student services and the academic experience that students are having with at Tufts? Because there's so, you know, there's obviously so much you know, critical theory, sociology, other disciplines that can be brought into addressing these issues, to, you know, it's essential to education, beyond just the experience of living at Tufts. How is all of that being taken into account?
Again, I'd like to start. So just to give a little bit, one, thank you for the question, and just to give a little bit, add some nuance into it. So because I'm the director of the LGBT Center and interim director of the Women's Center, my favorite word, I have the population is more nebulous, right? So it's kind of, it's hard to like nail down who is in, who is out, what it's looking like for both of those demographics, which tend to also overlap. So I'm thinking about a few instances where when we were on campus and there were folks in the LGBT Center, everybody's having conversations. I feel like this was probably the most full we've been without there being programming. And then there was an opportunity to learn, right? A teaching opportunity. So oftentimes when folks think of LGBTQ communities, they think of a monolithic group, right? When in actuality, LGBTQ white folks can be racist, LGBTQ folks can be transphobic, folks can be xenophobic, there's poor folks, there's folks with money, all of these things, there's different class backgrounds when we're thinking about LGBT communities specifically. And I would also say within women's communities as well. So even within that community, there is a lot of bias, but part of it is being able to have a strong foundation of what we stand for, like what our values are, what our mission is. We never ever try to silence people, but there is definitely this, I would say this grounding kind of resolution in the LGBT centers that we don't question people's humanity, right? We can have a conversation that are conversations that are challenging. We can welcome folks who have varying, like, you know, conservative, liberal, middle views, and everyone is welcome there. But what we don't do is question people's humanity, right? And so part of that kind of nixes a lot of the biases or hard conversations that come up because we're approaching it from a human perspective, right? Like you are a person who experiences harm, who experiences joy, who experiences these things, and we're having this conversation. And so whenever it feels like it's leading into something where it's like, that feels like a bias, we offer readings, we offer classes, right? We work very closely with the Women's Gender Sexuality Studies Department, which also has kind of a segment for queer studies. So we make sure that we are putting students in touch with these professors and these faculty members. Like, did you know there was a class for that here at Tufts? The RCD, so the Department for Race, Colonialism, and Diaspora, is a brand new department. And usually students are like, well, I don't know what to do or what to say if someone says something that's this. It's like, we have an amazing faculty that can actually help you out with that. We understand you are an engineering student, but did you think about this particular class, right? So that's one of the things I can't wait about getting back in person, is being able to make those connections in person and have those conversations with students in real time around what getting out of their personal bubble looks like, right? And because we have students coming in from everywhere, and we want to make sure that we are pushing these conversations instead of hiding them, right? But again, at the LGBT Center and the Women's Center, we don't question folks' humanity. And for me, I feel like that allows it to approach the conversations different while being mindful of their bias, if that was helpful.
Yeah, I would just add, that is, you know, that is it, right? The other, that's the frame that we want to come from. The other piece that we, in recognition of exactly that question, folks coming in from a myriad of different areas, is really scaffolding opportunities for learning and conversation throughout the educational experience, right? So thinking about coming in from orientation, right? One of the really sort of foundational goals in orientation is to think about diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. And so through our orientation programs, there are opportunities for folks to engage intentionally with each other, intentionally with the work, give a foundation and an opportunity to sort of think about, what does it mean to be situated perhaps in my privilege? Because, I hold privilege, and I also have sort of aspects of oppression that live within my identities, right? So how do we think about that? Particularly, and I'll sort of speak to the experience of myself as a baby freshman coming in. I came from Trinidad and Tobago. I didn't really have the context for the United States and what it meant to be a Black woman in the States, right? And so the centers were really sort of instrumental in helping me understand who I am, right? And myself in the context of Tufts, and it sort of creates safe spaces and opportunities to be in community, and then and not just sort of stay there, but then springboard into Tufts to really experience what it means to be a Tufts student, right? And have conversations with folks who I'd never met before, or from places that I didn't even know yet. And so that is really our philosophy, is sort of scaffolding in those learning opportunities, and then in the centers and across GSDI, creating a little bit of a safe haven to come and rest and be challenged, as Hope mentioned, right? Because we're going to continue to sort of stretch and grow folks' learning, but then give opportunities to move forward. So, yeah.
Wonderful, great. I'm gonna head back to the Q&A. I'm going to lump two questions here. The first is great question. Bringing us back to basics. What does it mean to be an anti-racist institution? And what are the specific changes made since President Monaco made this initiative public? And then the other question is, what will be different than efforts in the past to make Tufts anti-racist?
These are great, great questions. You're hitting right at the core, I think, of the part of the conversation that has been ongoing on campus, right? So what does it really mean in this movement? We really had to sort of think about definitions, right? We have to sort of get grounded in our definitions of what it means to be anti-racist. And I'll lean on Dr. Kendi's work, as I'm sure many people have read. To be anti-racist is to just sort of not be not racist, right? But to actively move towards dismantling systems of oppression. And that is certainly, for us, our framework, in that active learning and unlearning, and active dismantling of the systems of oppression that exist for our students. And so I think that is sort of the first and most basic part of it, and for, and sort of to think about maybe a concrete example of what we as DSDI have been thinking about and how we might use the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fund, is to think about access opportunities for students of different sort of historically marginalized backgrounds, where we see the structures of oppression kind of keeping folks back from that full level of access. So thinking about, for example, expanding our support for Native and Indigenous students, right? Our Native and Indigenous students are often an unseen population, and at Tufts, they move through many of our spaces, but as of yet, we don't have as much of dedicated support. And we have been, over the last year, partnering with admissions and student affairs to really try and build intentional support for those our ever-growing population of Native and Indigenous students. And what is our relationship also to the land that we are resting on, right? Acknowledging that that we are on Indigenous land, right, at Tufts. So that's, one of the things that we are actively moving towards. Another piece that we're thinking about is career and internship support. And I'd love maybe Jared and Hope for you to talk a little bit about, the expansion of that conversation.
Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and jump on in. I keep saying I'm the director of the First Center, but if you're unfamiliar, we support first generation low income and students with undocumented status. And the reason I say that is because for the student communities that I work closely with, I really try to think about ways that allow them to really get the full exposure, the full opportunity of attending a university like Tufts. So for many of our students, the idea would be to really think about how can we uplift and support our students to find those career opportunities, find those internship opportunities that really shape their everyday, shape their future career paths, teach them all the things that they're looking to learn, but may exist outside the classroom. So in this case, our hope is that we could utilize the fund to really support unpaid internships, which would allow students, especially if they're not from the Boston area, for example, to support themselves, be able to, afford rent, food, and transportation costs, so that they can jump headfirst into that career opportunity that will help them build the level of success that they see for themselves. This is something that I think a lot about because I have a lot of students who share that they may choose not to pursue an opportunity because they just can't afford it, and instead choose something that's a little less, ideal, a little less, their preference for that second or third opportunity is great. It's high. They're really excited to do that work. But what they really wanted to do was something that may not have really been helpful because they couldn't afford to, take advantage of that opportunity. So for me, that's like a easy first stop opportunity for the fund to be potentially allowing our students to, get the most out of their Tufts experience while also exposing them to things that they may not have otherwise had an opportunity to experience.
Thanks, Jared. So I'm thinking about things that I've seen for the students whom I support. Usually the students who I support are looking about or thinking about their rights when they get to the internship or the job or the placement. Like, am I able to dress this way? I'm thinking about trans and non-binary folks. Am I able to utilize the name that I choose to go by, or am I going to be harassed for it? If I am harassed for it, what do my rights look like? And honestly, friends, it depends state by state, city by city. So even though last year we had a major victory around LGBTQ folks, the L, the G, the B, the T, and the Q, and the plus folks being covered under Title VII for non-discrimination, right? Not being able to be discriminated through employment. These are still really new concepts for a lot of folks, right? So there is still a lot of underemployment if we think about trans and non-binary folks. So someone may be a double jumbo, but maybe they are working at a job because a job that is not in par with their degrees because maybe they were shunned out of another job, right? So oftentimes I see alum coming back as well, looking for support around like, well, how do I get my name changed on my diploma? Or do you have any idea of an attorney who might be in this state? And oftentimes folks thinking about students who are undergraduate students don't have a lot of money to go to a court and pay to have a name change, right? And so also thinking about a lot of electronic systems that can't help but get in the way because we have this mindset of like being very gender binary. So you're either one or the other. So there's a lot of things that students, as well as alum, like current students and former students are running into around this, right? And so again, thinking about gender affirming undergarments, gender affirming clothing. We used to have a clothing swap. So we would do like folks bring in the clothes that no longer fit and people swap it out. Due to COVID guidelines, we could no longer do that. So we've been trying to find out really, trying to be really strategic in how we are actively supporting students and also thinking about ways that we can better support them out of the LGBT Center, right? Because we're very limited in what our budget is around programming and things like that. But when it gets to the needs of the specific student, it starts to elevate in cost. And again, thinking about all of the points that Jared just brought up around, I can't go to this internship because I can't afford it, coupled with, but I'm a trans person, how am I going to be affirmed? How do I find out what my rights are? How do I research what this organization is about? Oftentimes we support them in doing those endeavors as well. But again, it really depends state by state, person by person. So it's about meeting the immediate need. So there isn't really a guidebook of kind of what to do in those instances because everyone is different.
That's wonderful. I'm getting goosebumps listening to you guys talk because I just remember when Nandi and I were at Tufts that, you know, a big push. I remember a big push to get what has become the RCD department, you know, to get a department status, and it was there was an Africana Studies minor when Nandi and I were in school, but really institutionalizing that. And then also, you know, President Backau's, one of his big initiatives was to bring Tufts Need Blind, which he did partway through his presidency. And you know, you know, but I think that there was some criticism of Tufts back then to not bring the student services to support what it means to have a need blind admissions policy that everyone can agree with, but you know, make sure that people are supported when they get to school. So these are all initiatives that just really, you know, remind me of the really important work that was going on, you know, 10 and much longer years ago, seeing it come to fruition. I'm going to go back to the Q&A. There's one question here. It says it's from an alum who identifies himself as a gay man and says that he has designated gifts in the past to LGBTQ initiatives specifically, and he wonders if that's still a category of its own. Sorry, is that still its own category of? I think there's a wording issue, but how that fits into the definition of diversity for the purposes of this fund and the initiatives that we're talking about so far.
Nandi, can you help me out a little bit? So if I am not mistaken, the gifts still get moved to the LGBT Center, right? And so they'll be able to be utilized by the LGBT Center. From what I understand, there is still, you know, the larger fund that does get divvied out to everyone and goes to the overall DSDI initiative. But if I'm not mistaken, there is still opportunity to directly donate to the LGBT Center. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a more is better kind of opportunity. You know, we have the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fund to sort of contribute to these broader initiatives and to really support that. But if you're so moved to continue donating directly to different centers, like that is also still available, and we'll definitely still get to the LGBT Center or the First Resource Center or many of the others. So. Yeah, we're not closing off any avenues. Yeah.
Great. And then we have going to raise one last question, and then we can wrap up. So the last question is: there are pockets at Tufts with very limited diversity represented in their communities, namely varsity sports. Some of the teams lack diversity sensitivity, socially ostracized team members who are students of color, and yet it's difficult to address due to lack of numbers and team leadership playing a role in the lack of diversity sensitivity. And I think the question is about, you know, how to address this serious problem in sports and also in other communities at Tufts.
Sure. I've partnered really closely with athletics since coming on board, and there's been a lot of work done through the athletics department to think about how to best support our students of color and students of different marginalized identities. You know, different coaches have built relationships with, you know, I'll just sort of name, you know, Hope, Katrina Moore in the Africana Center. She's a really incredibly trusted partner in thinking about supporting our students, student athletes of color, thinking about the athletes of color student organization, right? As folks that we also, you know, speak to and talk with, and they as student advocates for their own teams are really deeply involved in this sort of movement towards equity and justice. And so, you know, it's as I've mentioned before, it's something that, you know, we're moving towards, right? It's an ever sort of ever moving target, but there are definite partnerships and really intentional partnerships on the part of, you know, students and coaches and the athletic staff to connect to the division and think about doing that learning opportunity, connected programming, and other pieces. You know, I think we've been able to, one of the pieces in the pandemic is that even though folks are everywhere, you know, we are, as we are doing right now, able to jump on. Duncan, you're in London, you know, jump on and still engage in learning, and that's been really an asset as we've worked together. So, yeah, for sure.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Hope, Nandi, and Jared, and thank you everyone else for joining us here tonight. This was our last March to the Top event this week, and really great week of programming. So thank you for being part of it. A reminder that the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are part of our funding priorities during the March to the Top campaign. There's a link in that was just shared in the chat box. Through March 31st, every 25 individual gifts to this fund will secure an additional $2,500 for diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, thanks to the generosity of the Alumni Council, Holly Kelly, J88, and Andrew Lipsky. Please help Tufts continue to prioritize its commitment to becoming a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive institution with a gift to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fund. And as I said, the link was just shared in the box. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and thanks again.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, everybody. It was a great conversation.
Yeah.